I thought I'd talk a little about characters in games, specifically horror stories, because that's what I'm working on at the moment with Rurouni Dan. We're working on our horror experience. So therefore that's uppermost in my mind, and what we do with that can be related to any genre really. And I'm also talking specifically first person camera and environmental storytelling. There is absolutely no difference between telling a story in a game through a protagonist and telling a story in a book through a protagonist. The protagonist comes first, and the story is born out of how that protagonist responds to situations. Rather than building the entire level first and then trying to force your protagonist through it, build the first environment around your protagonist and ask yourself, what would the protagonist do next? Knowing the protagonist more than 80% better than the player, you should have no problem deciding what comes next and what that character would do given any situation. Never take shortcuts with the character, ever. The old cliched saying, show, don't tell, couldn't be any more fitting for a game, because here you have a medium where you can show and not tell. And yet we still get situations, even in AAA games, where they give people info dumps. They tell you how the player's feeling. The player will tell you that the character will tell you what to do next, more or less. I've got to get out of here. How can I get out of here? Perhaps if I check these out over here, that'll give me a clue. It's like, that's not what you need to be doing. You should be designing your level around the character. So by the time the player reaches those moments, the player will automatically know what this character would do, because by then they are that character. Once you're in the character's head and you're playing as the character, now you can start playing with the player through the character. You don't want to hit them with lots of things, just many little pointers. Let's give you a silly example. Let's say I wanted someone to buy an apple from my fruit store, right? And I know the route they're walking to my fruit store. I could put a picture of an apple in the subway that I know they walk by. I could have someone planted on the sidewalk eating an apple. I could then have someone carrying a bag of freshly bought apples past them as they approached the shop, and by the time they got into the shop, apples would be subliminally planted in their head and they may buy an apple. Think about that for a moment. That sounds a little silly, but think about it in terms of environmental storytelling and how you could use that to slowly guide the player to feel and expect something. And once that expectation is planted in their head, that moment you want to scare them will scare the bejeebies out of them. So in order to make the player feel genuinely terrified, you've got to have a whole lot of nothing, with small subliminal cues placed throughout that won't even be registering with the player, but they will be slowly picking it up, because those little things represent the innermost fears of the character they're controlling. It's not the smashing vase, it's not the slamming door, it's not the sudden loss of light that makes the characters jump out of their skin. On their own, they're just cliches, but with a good preliminary build-up, they become exceptionally frightening moments. But you've got to be brave enough and hold off. Constantly hold off. And then even an innocuous thing like a coat hanging on a wall will scare the player, because They're expecting all the time. They make their own ghosts. They conjure their own faces from the shadows. Every little tap, every little creak is an expectation of another scare, even though you may have only scared them twice in an hour. They will be terrified because you have done the groundwork. You are working with the character. Taking all those things into consideration, and don't take anything for granted. What I'm talking about are sounds, what I'm talking about are layouts, lighting, music. If you find yourself relying on scary music to scare the player, you've made a mistake. If you're relying on smashes and groans and creaks to scare the player, you're doing something wrong. Those should enhance the fear that's already in the player and keep it bubbling over to a point where it almost breaks at the next spot section of a genuinely scary moment. If you can just hold back and hold back, trust me, that horror punch will knock them out. So I hope you found that informative. It was a little less than I'd hoped. I was going into more depth, but I got to 6 minutes and realised this is going to be a heck of a long video. So I might do a series in the future and break it down into 5 minutes videos. I don't know yet, because I'm just scratching the surface with this really. So anyway, all that's left for me to say is fare thee well, toodle pip, au revoir, and all that good stuff. I hope you enjoyed this video, folks, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.